Welcome, friends. You're watching the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we're covering the situation as of May 30th, 2026. It's been an exceptionally eventful day, so let's get straight into it. Strikes on western and northwestern Ukraine. Russia shifts tactics. Let's start with something that used to be taken for granted. Whenever drones or missiles reached western Ukraine, it was always part of a large, coordinated mass strike. Single drones simply didn't fly that far. There was no logic to it. That picture is now changing, and changing quite dramatically. Over recent weeks, Russian drones have been appearing with increasing regularity over Rivne, Kovel and Zhytomyr oblasts, the very northwestern edge of Ukraine. And they're showing up not only as part of coordinated mass strikes, but as part of routine, day-to-day operations. These are no longer isolated incidents. This is a systematic pattern. What does it mean in practice? The Russian side appears to be methodically probing and attempting to establish fire control over two key highways, the M06 and M07. These are the main arteries running from the Polish border toward Kyiv. In essence, Russia is now trying to do to these roads what Ukraine has already done to the southern supply routes, the corridors around Crimea, Kerch, Melitopol, Mariupol, Taganrog and Berdyansk. In that southern zone, the Ukrainian side began striking fuel tankers several weeks ago, and a fairly serious problem with fuel supply and logistics is now accumulating in the south. Russia wants to replicate that scenario on the western routes. Strike on Shostka, railway station wiped from the map. Moving on, a large block of information today comes from Chernihiv and Sumy oblasts in northeastern Ukraine. During the night of May 30th, a strike was carried out on the settlement of Mashovo. According to available reports, hangars or warehouses were destroyed there, presumably storage sites for AFU drones that were being prepared for use against targets deep inside Russian territory. But the main story of the night is Shostka. That's where the bulk of today's footage is coming from. A nighttime strike hit the city, and the recordings clearly show secondary detonations, a chain of explosions indicating there was something substantial stored there. An ammunition depot, a fuel store, or something of comparable nature. Shortly afterward, information emerged that the primary strike was carried out by German drones targeting the railway station. And already this morning, fresh footage came in from the scene, from Shostka railway station. What we see on those recordings leaves no room for doubt. The station has been completely destroyed, not damaged, not partially collapsed, wiped out. This is the result of the overnight strike within the broader Russian mass strike. Strikes on Sumy, energy infrastructure in the crosshairs. Alongside Shostka, strikes were also carried out on the city of Sumy itself during the same night. The primary targets here were energy infrastructure facilities, specifically substations. Available footage shows a Russian drone striking an installation in the northern part of the city, a substation. This is not a coincidence or a one-off episode. Over the past several weeks, the intensity of strikes against Sumy's energy grid has been steadily growing. This correlates well with the broader logic. The Sumy and Kharkiv directions are clearly among the priorities for the Russian side, and the systematic degradation of energy infrastructure is standard preparation for more active ground operations. Ukraine's retaliatory strike, 210 drones, Taganrog and Feodosia. The Ukrainian side launched its own mass strike during the same night. The first maps showing drone routes and numbers began circulating at around midnight. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, a total of 210 drones were involved in the strike. Russia's Ministry of Defense published its morning report. Between 20 hours and 07 hours, Russian air defenses shot down or suppressed 127 Ukrainian drones. The main targets of the strike were Taganrog and Feodosia. In Taganrog, local residents spent the whole night filming air defense operations and posting videos in real time. By morning, the Ukrainian side had released its own footage showing the results of strikes on various installations near the city. The situation around Feodosia is even more graphic. Satellite imagery captured a thermal anomaly in the northern part of the city, a large fire. Cross-referencing the coordinates with a map makes it clear. The strike hit an oil depot. So we end up with a symmetrical exchange for the night. The Russian side struck an oil depot in Rivne Oblast, while the Ukrainian side struck an oil depot near Feodosia. southern direction, Highway M14 and the fuel crisis. Looking at the Crimean Peninsula, the southern part of Zaporizhzhia Oblast and Kherson Oblast in general, the situation there continues to deteriorate. Local authorities are already openly urging the population to avoid using Highway M14 unless absolutely necessary. This is the main supply artery in the region. Furthermore, mines are being discovered along the road. Their presence there is no accident. Remote mining is being employed, including reportedly via drones. These are no longer isolated finds, it's a system. At the same time, reports are coming in about fuel shortages in Crimea, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson Oblasts. Fuel stations are operating erratically, supply chains are disrupted. Individual sources report actual fuel shortages. And here it's important to be direct. None of this is a temporary measure set to expire on June 1st. This is not a limited-term operation. This is the new reality of the conflict, and it will persist until the conflict ends. Mining will continue, logistics strikes will continue, through summer, through winter, and into 2027 if the war goes on. The Russian side will have to build countermeasures, alternative routes, reinforced protection, logistical solutions. Without that, conditions will only worsen. Zaporizhzhia sector, less than 11 kilometers to Kharkiv. Now to the front line itself. We'll start with the Zaporizhzhia sector, where today brought some important map updates. The Ukrainian side published footage from FPV drone operators striking Russian forward positions in the corridor between HULYAIPOLE and Kharkiv. Several episodes were geolocated, one strike near Luhivsky, a second west of Charivin, and a third at the village of Charivna itself. Based on this footage, the map was updated. All territory previously marked as a grey zone or infiltration zone has now been colored as under Russian control. What does this mean in practical terms? The distance between the Russian forward positions northeast of the Kharkiv agglomeration and the city of Kharkiv itself is now less than 11 kilometers in a straight line. The Russian army is advancing, and updates on HULYAIPOLE should be expected shortly. Dnipropetrovsk direction, two sides, two contradictory reports. Now to what is arguably the most confusing situation of the day, the Dnipropetrovsk direction, around the village of Lisna. Over the past several days, the eastern grouping of forces had been reporting heavy fighting in this area. Yesterday, Russia's Ministry of Defense and the eastern grouping announced a significant improvement of positions. Today, a number of mapping services confirmed this. The Russian side has established firm control over the Dybrivsky Forest Reserve near Lisna, as well as over territory on the Ukrainian bank of the Vovcha River. From these positions, further movement toward both Velika Mikhailivka and Havrilivka is reportedly planned. However, almost simultaneously with these reports, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense announced the launch of a counter-offensive on this very sector. According to Ukrainian data, AFU units significantly improved their positions over the past 24 hours in the areas of Ivanivka, Zeleny High, Andriivka, Klevtsov, and Alexandrograd. Ukrainian units allegedly entered Podubna and Myrn and are reportedly already advancing toward the area of Komar. The result? Both sides are publishing diametrically opposite accounts of the same stretch of front. Someone here is plainly lying, or at minimum presenting wishful thinking as fact. The key difference is this: Russian sources back their claims with objective control footage. The Ukrainian side is publishing map corrections with virtually no visual confirmation. Time will sort it out, but the fighting here is clearly very intense. Dobrovolske sector, pressure is building. On the Dobrovolske sector, today brings a characteristic shift. Pro-Ukrainian sources are registering increased Russian pressure. Throughout the day, several sets of footage appeared showing strikes on bridges and river crossings in this area. Ukrainian sources also report a rise in the intensity of attacks directly toward Dobropilya and surrounding settlements. This is a familiar pattern of preparation for more active operations. First come the strikes on crossings and logistics, then the push on strongpoints. Kostiantynivka and Oleksievo-Druzhkivka, Russia prepares for the next phase. No fresh map corrections for Kostiantynivka itself today. But there is highly telling footage from the area of Oleksievo-Drushkivka, the next settlement on the road from Kostiantynivka toward Drushkivka. Pro-Russian sources released several footage sets showing strikes on river crossings in this area. One episode is particularly telling. A Russian drone flies under a bridge searching for planted explosive devices. During this reconnaissance, several mines were discovered under the bridge over the Kryvyi Torets River. A strike followed, and according to the footage, the road bridge near Oleksievo-Drushkivka was, in all likelihood, destroyed. What does this tell us? The Russian side has begun methodical preparation for the battle for Oleksievo-Drushkivka, which means the fighting for Kostiantynivka itself is likely approaching some kind of logical conclusion. Drone activity over Kramatorsk deserves separate attention. Footage from there now arrives daily. Russian drones are working against AFU military equipment, gradually building a control zone over the city. This is an eloquent signal. Kramatorsk is turning into a frontline city. And if that is the case, the question of civilian evacuation there will come to a head in the very near future. Kupiansk, Russian army expanding control in the northern part of the city. On the northern directions, today's key footage comes from Kupiansk. The Ukrainian side published recordings of strikes against Russian forward positions in the northern part of the city. Based on this footage, the map was updated. The Russian army continues to improve its positions in northern Kupiansk, steadily expanding its zone of control and pushing the advance forward on this axis. Kharkiv Sumy sector, pushing toward Bilyi Kolodyaz, escalation near Kozacha Lopan. On the Kharkiv Sumy sector of the front, there are minor but telling map corrections in the area of Karichne. The Russian army continues to push south toward Bilyi Kolodyaz. Footage from the Rubizhny area shows aerial bomb strikes against AFU positions, part of a flanking maneuver designed to bypass Bilyi Kolodyaz from the southwest. Information from the Kozacha Lopan direction is also coming in with increasing frequency. The Russian army has been advancing here since April 2026, and evidence of its gradual entrenchment inside Kozacha Lopan is growing. Intense combat operations in this area should be expected imminently. As for the Sumy direction proper, fighting continues for Pisarivka and Ivolzhanska. The northern grouping of forces may publish an official report on this sector in the near future. Russia-Europe, an era of confrontation, not negotiation. Before we wrap up today's briefing, a few words on the broader geopolitical backdrop, because what is happening on the front lines cannot be separated from what is happening in the international arena. Europe has entered what analysts are now describing as a prolonged era of confrontation with Russia. The full-scale war and Russia's expanding hybrid campaign are systematically dismantling the remnants of the post-Cold War cooperative security order. The Kremlin's state-backed sabotage operations across Europe have evolved into a persistent feature of its hybrid toolkit, targeting logistics nodes, defense-related supply chains, and critical civilian infrastructure. Undersea cable cuts in the Baltic and Nordic regions have been recurring since 2024, and the pace is accelerating. Munich Security Conference GlobSec. Analysts now identify three distinct players acting against Russia: Ukraine, Europe, and the United States, each with its own set of interests. The united anti-Russian coalition that existed in 2023-2024 has effectively fractured. Europe has stepped into the role of primary financier and arms supplier for Kyiv, while Washington, under the current administration, has grown increasingly transactional in its approach. The EU's €800 billion rearmament program is, from Moscow's perspective, far from a purely defensive posture. And Russia is using that framing to justify further escalation of its hybrid pressure on the continent. Iran, the United States, and the Strait of Hormuz. The world's energy choke point hangs in the balance. The situation around the Strait of Hormuz remains one of the defining geopolitical stories of 2026, and it is directly connected to the Ukraine conflict, particularly through the energy and commodity markets. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched strikes against Iran, targeting its nuclear program and ballistic missile infrastructure. Among the targets was Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who was killed in the strikes. Iran's response was swift. It closed the Strait of Hormuz to all foreign shipping, a waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil and 20% of global LNG passes annually. Wikipedia House of Commons Library. The IRGC boarded and attacked merchant vessels, laid sea mines in the strait, and issued warnings forbidding passage. At least 17 merchant ships were damaged, 7 were abandoned, and 2 were captured.